Welcome back, guys, to the final installment of the Big Sky Podcast Network Power Rankings. And yet again, we're not talking about rankings because halfway through the year, who gives a shit anyway? This is a special close of the year episode. One, we're doing regular season grades. Now, you might be wondering, hey, why are you doing grades right now? Well, look, because Montana State's going to make it pretty damn far. And I don't really want to record a 2024 episode in 2025. So there you go. So Patty's here with us, as always, holding it down in Cheney. We have a special guest, Franklin Spicer from the Jungle Land podcast. First off, Tubbs listeners are going to be happy to see that Jungle Land is still alive after this weekend. There'd been some radio silence, but that's okay. Think of this as an official, the invite link that I sent you, Franklin. Think of that as a wellness check, which you passed. But anyway, Franklin, how's it? Are you an Idaho State student?
Yeah, I'm a student at ISU. So just in my second year.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, hey, Franklin, great to have you on. Patty, as always, good to see you. We're going to do conference grades for the most part. By the way, the Big Sky Podcast Network Power Ranking presented by Tubbs the Club. That means presented by Snake River Stampede Canadian Whiskey. So we're going to do conference grades. And the only thing we're going to try to do conference grading that, hey, maybe as a listener, you're wondering, are these curved? Do we have expectations built in? No, like an A is an A and an F is an F. That's it. There's a little bit of flex because, like, hey, like some teams, if you overperformed or if you're on an upward trend, like, okay, you can bump that up a teeny bit. Like, hey, for example, like there's not a Northern Colorado A. Now, there is a grade for Northern Colorado, but there's not like UNC A or an MSU B or something like that. Your grade is your grade. So before we hit that, just to touch on the close of the conference season very, very quickly. Now, we're not going to break down the games, just run through the games that closed regular season. Hey, Montana State abuses Montana 34-11 in the Brawl of the Wild. Cal Poly loses in spite of what Colby Peterson thought was going to happen on Tubbs Club at Weber State 28-17. Cal Poly finishes with two wins on the season. Weber State with more than two. Eastern Washington gives an assist to Northern Arizona. The Lumberjacks win 30-18 and sneak into one of the final spots in the FCS playoffs, meaning they're unseeded. Montana State finishes with the one seed. Patty, Montana's the 14 seed, correct? Yeah. Montana, like they're seeded. They get to host a game, but they're only going to host one. Then to close out the week's action, top 5 Portland State beats Northern Colorado. UC Davis barely holds on, beating Sacramento State in the Causeway Classic 42-39. UC Davis ends up as the 5 seed in the FCS playoffs, and Idaho narrowly edges Idaho State 40-17 in Holterine. I will always call it Holterine, Franklin. I don't care what the name is. I actually kind of like Holt. It's got a little special. It's got a special place in my heart. But after that win, Idaho finishes with the 8 seed. Little shocking, just based off what the other projections are. We might talk about that when we hit Idaho and talk grades. But that's how we close the conference seasons. Now, hey, we're going to work through the grades. I kind of want to batch the lowest grades real quick. So based off standings, and hey, just the way we'll rotate this. So I'll introduce to Patty, then Franklin, you follow right after Patty, so we don't have to reintroduce each other 1,000 times.
There you go.
All right, so bottom of the Big Sky Conference. I think the Fs are just unbelievably easy to slot here. I'm going to give Fs to Northern Colorado, Sacramento State, and Cal Poly. One, like, hey, guys, just give me a quick thumbs up, thumbs down. You guys agree with those 3 as Fs? Okay, Franklin, we're going to throw it to you first. You do not necessarily buy Cal Poly, Sac State, and Northern Colorado as Fs. Who is not an F in that group to you?
Yeah, I absolutely agree that Northern Colorado and Sac State are Fs, but I do think that Cal Poly deserves at least a D in this situation. They came out with a win 2 weeks ago against Sacramento State. They have a few wins on the season, and definitely a lot better than they looked in the past. So.
Okay, so you give Cal Poly D. They finished 3-8 on the year, 2-6 in conference play. Now, one of those wins was a D2 win over Western Oregon. There were 2 conference wins though: a 28-7 win over vaunted Northern Colorado, and like I said, a 26-23 win over Sacramento State. Your Cal Poly take, Franklin, is okay. Like, they're low, but they picked up a couple wins, and at least like they weren't They were to buttress your point, Franklin. I think Cal Poly was competitive in a few more games than maybe we all thought Cal Poly might be over the course of the year. So you can at least like squint and see a form of upward trajectory. I will accept that interpretation. Now, Patty, you cannot take this any direction you want in this grouping. So we'll let Franklin's point stand. You're saying that's a Cal Poly D, correct, Franklin?
Yeah, Cal Poly D.
D or D minus?
I'm just go with D. I mean, it's already a really low grade. So
generous hearts in Jungle Land. Okay, Patty, whatever direction you want. You want to push back on Cal Poly D, or which of the other teams in that grouping did you find more intriguing this year? You're on mute, buddy.
I wasn't muted. Microphone was off. Even worse. So Cal Poly, I kind of agree with a D, because they definitely they were a lot more competitive this year than we've seen in years past, right? Like there was years where there's just no prayer that they're competitive with anyone, and like they competed with Idaho and they competed on kind of, they competed with Idaho State, they beat Sac State. Like I think there's definitely positives for Cal Poly moving forward, but like
their conference scoring margin was like -11. Which is still bad, but you are right. It was not quite the catastrophe it had been the last other years. Keep going.
Especially with after like the first couple weeks, we were like, "Eesh!" Like we were not very. We were looking at it like, "Geez, we thought we might see a step in it." There was nothing there. But I got to rant about Sac State really quick. What the heck, dude? Like this team came into the year top. I think they were a top 15 team. I mean, Andy Thompson inherited a Big Sky championship level program. And in 2 years, they're finishing 11th in the Big Sky, losing to Cal Poly. That's bad, man.
Yeah, and what's wild too is like, hey, Carson Conklin, redshirt freshman starter, 28 touchdowns, 8 picks, like pretty solid start offensively. I mean, as a redshirt freshman, as a starter. But I'm with you. Like if the grading was partially based off of like what we thought they're going to be. Oh, Sac State's the lowest grade in the conference. It's not remotely close. Sac State, they also looked strong early in the year, largely beating bad teams, right? Like that's how Sac State looked okay. But if we were to give the award for the disappointment of the year, I mean, that's a unanimous Sacramento State, right, Franklin?
Either Sac State or Weber State, man.
We'll get to Weber in like 2 seconds. Now, I want to say one thing about Northern Colorado, because it wouldn't be this show if we didn't talk about Northern Colorado a little bit too much. So based off of interactions I had with some media figures who follow Northern Colorado, apparently Ed Lamb is really committed to recruiting the state of Colorado and not the transfer portal. And I got to say, I actually messaged the UNC guy saying, I think Ed Lamb needs to look at Idaho State, not try to be Idaho State, but look at like that's a mix over there of transfer portal, to plug and play in some spots while also high school recruiting from the region hey, like when we get to Idaho State, there's an obvious trajectory Idaho State's on. It's not the trajectory in Northern Colorado, and Cody Hawkins and Ed Lamb started at the exact same time. So that's, just an example of things being able to turn around. Northern Colorado scored 11 points a game. You'll beat no one at that. And 11 points a game should not be hard to improve upon. Well, they scored 12 points a game last year in conference play, like right around there. So they've been holding steady for 2 years. So something has to change there. Okay, we've covered the bottom of the barrel. We have to sprint. Like just because when I started on Tubbs the Club when Idaho was at its worst, the Petrino era in football plus the Zach Kloss era in basketball. So I have way too much practice talking about shitty teams. So I just have to do a hard break. We're going to move on, right? So and of those teams that we just talked about, I mean, just to make sure everyone's clear on records, Northern Colorado 1-11 on the year, 1-7 in Big Sky play. They beat Weber State. Sacramento State 3-9 on the season, 1-7 in Big Sky play. Sacramento State, they beat. Funny to say, they beat Weber State too. So Weber State doing some charity. Maybe that's why they're not in that F bracket. We already talked about Cal Poly in their record. Okay, the next, we have a slew of teams who finished 3-5 in Big Sky play. And I figured there's a couple teams we want to talk about and a couple teams we don't want to talk about. I want to see where we slot these grades. These teams have finished 3-5 in Big Sky play. That's top 5 Portland State. That's your Weber State Wildcats, your Eastern Eagles, and your Idaho State Bengals. So, Franklin, I'm going to put you on the spot talking Idaho State, who I think Idaho State and Eastern are the two most interesting in that group of 4 overall. Franklin, how are you going to grade Idaho State this year?
I'm thinking like a C plus. And before judge a little too much. I mean, we won 5 games this year, one of them being a D2 game, on 3 games in conference. So that's the same amount of wins as last year. But I only give him like the plus just because we've had a lot of close games. I mean, Portland State, somewhere around the same area. We lost to just basically in last possession. Same thing with NAU. We just couldn't, come with a win. But we challenged them, and then Montana stayed up to a point in the 4th quarter until they ran away with it. But if I'm looking just like from my perspective, you see us 3-5 conference team, 5-7, sitting around 500. I think I give them a C plus, if being generous. So a little bit better than some of the other teams that I would rate at C.
Okay, so Franklin, we're going to bounce back to you in a second. Patty, you hear CC plus, and you hear, I'm paraphrasing what Franklin said. He's essentially saying, look, obviously there's room to grow, but Idaho State, they showed last year wasn't a fluke by any means. And I think the team on both sides of the ball looked a little tougher. So, Patty, your take on giving Idaho State somewhere between a C to a C plus, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm right about the same spot for Idaho State, right? They're a program that's been bad for years and years and years, and building that momentum takes time. Getting to 5-7, you're 2 games away from the end of the season. You had a chance to go 500, even above 500 if you win a couple tough games. Like I'm not going to say like that's a giant improvement from last year, but just the trajectory is clearly up for that program right now. And obviously there's defensive issues, but just generally, I think that they have clearly taken a step from where they've been the last couple of years. And so I think, finishing 5-7 with clear upward trajectory, you bring a decent amount of your team back next year. I think that's worthy of a C plus.
Yeah. So the things that I'm going to say, I mostly agree with those points. So what are the things that I think are promising if I'm an Idaho State Bengal is, one, Cody Hawkins did lose some talent last season. And they switched starting quarterbacks. Jordan Cook was a guy who was started at the beginning of the season. Kobe Tracy won the job. I bring those 2 things up because Cody Hawkins, in one way or another, had to replace some of the offensive talent from year 1, and he did. That's a big deal, showing that you can recruit guys. And hey, this is part of transfer portal era recruiting. It's not all just high school. It's developing guys and getting plug and play guys. Cody Hawkins showed he could do that. So if I'm a Bengal, I'm saying great news. If I'm a Bengal, I'm saying until the last 2 weeks of the season, no one's going to say Idaho State was a good defensive team. They're bad. But they looked way worse those last 2 weeks than I thought Idaho State looked earlier. I mean, Patty, you and I had talked on the show saying on defense, Idaho State wasn't good, but they looked more physical than they looked in 2023. So, you've got some clear things I think you can point to. I'm going to say, just from what I watch more Idaho State streams than you might guess, Franklin. I thought attendance looked a little bit better at Idaho State this season than last. I mean, you're there, Franklin. Tell me if I'm wrong.
Yeah. No, absolutely. We had, the Idaho game was, obviously sold out, but there's a good amount of Bengals there. And the visitor section filled up for the Vandals as well. But against Southern Utah, we had 9,000 people there. And
that Southern Utah win was that was a good win. Southern Utah was a fringe play. They almost got in the playoffs.
Yep, for sure.
So yeah, it's hey, obvious things to improve upon. And I'm going to go C, I'll go C, not C plus. I think, to me, I picked Idaho State to finish 11th in the Big Sky when we started because I saw last year's results and I said, hey, 2 of those are kind of weird wins, like that Eastern faceplant plus Portland State was, let's just say, not healthy in 2023. But hey, Idaho State proved me wrong. And I'm happy to have Idaho State prove me wrong. So I think they're clearly in that middle-ish tier of the conference. Like there's still some room to move. There's still some obvious improvements, especially on the defensive side of the ball, to think about playoffs next year. But also, hey, Cody Hawkins evolved as a coach with play calling. There was a little bit more in the run game this year, enough that teams had to respect. Most teams, you'd say, had to respect it a bit more. So those things are huge. Hawkins has to figure out something defensively because Runda. I mean, hey, phase one, if you got a D coordinator who like things just not working, like pulling the ripcord's the right call. Last game of the season is interesting timing, but the cord was ripped, right? So at least there's going to be a new face there. Idaho State can't. They just have to stop the run better than they did this year because they didn't stop the run at all.
I mean, yeah, absolutely agree. Defense, definitely some bad things going on, but I feel like just the fact that the last game of the season we didn't really have a defensive coordinator. It was taken by the safeties coach and an offensive mind, and we still made some like really good stops, for some field goals. And so I definitely think that they can improve, or we can improve in the future. And
all right, comment section really quick. Dane Moon agreeing with now Dane Moon was upset that door behind me is open, and what I gotta say is I have no explanation, man. Like we're recording at goddamn 10:30. Franklin's recording at 11:30. Like you get what you get, man. So anyway, otherwise, Dane Moon says they, meaning Idaho State, beat a borderline fringe playoff team that if they would have lost would have been the bubble, which is Southern Utah, which is a way of saying Dane's saying, hey, if SUU beats Idaho State, they're probably in the playoffs. So Idaho State not only gets a win, they can kind of say that's an SUU pelt. Brad Smith, how important was Daddy Hawkins to this season? Will he stick around? Your thoughts, Franklin?
So I assume he's referring to Dan Hawkins.
Yeah.
So I mean, he was there to help out with the special teams. I know that there were some issues like last year, but I mean, I think it'd be okay to say that Idaho State probably had the best special teams in the conference in terms of just like field goals and like punting. Not really so much on kick returns because we only had one this season. But yeah, I mean, he's there. I think he will stick around. He's going to help coach. His main thing is just like player development. So he's like coaching like individual players, kind of like running around and doing all the meticulous things that Cody would want to do. But Cody has to call the plays. Dan is going to be there and he's going to like coach up every single player, make sure that they get developed more. So
it sounds honestly like if you're a guy who is a good head coach like Dan Hawkins and you're at a point where you just don't want to be a head coach anymore, but you still want to be involved, it sounds like the dream job of like, what's his assignment? It's both nothing and everything at the same time. Like, so I could completely see him absolutely loving that. Crewhead 76 saying the game was fun and pokey, tons of vandals. Happy we could help ISU sell out the mini dome. Well, hey, I'm going to bring this up now. They're going to shift to Patty because we got to talk Eastern. Hey, spoiler, that's the other most interesting team to me in this middle tier subsection. The whole like pretending a rivalry doesn't exist. We don't do that on the show. If you care about the game more than another game, it's probably some form of a rival. So I'm happy that there's some energy growing in one way or another with Idaho State. And look at the attendance. Clearly that mattered. And clearly Vandals in Southern Idaho traveled to that game too. So I think of this as nothing but good news. Now, if I'm a Bengal, I want to lose by less than 30, like 20 at some point. But well, I suppose we'll get there at some point. All right, Patty.
I mean, if it takes a streak to, like whenever Idaho State wins, hopefully within the next few years, that streak it's going to feel better and it's going to make that rivalry, prosper. So,
well, I mean, hey, when Idaho State beat the shit out of Idaho in 2018, when Idaho first dropped down, that's honestly part of where at the Idaho end, really taking Idaho State more seriously started. Like we used to have a player who was on that team, Alex Boatman. He used to help run the Tubbs the Club show, and he used to say like, yeah, man, after that game, Idaho State became a team the players cared about a lot. So, I mean, you're right. Now, I hope we don't actually get to experience this alleged revenge, but there's a lot of time to go. All right, Eastern, Patty, I want you to first. I want your Eastern grade, but before we get your Eastern grade, I want to self-correct on this show. We had said Aaron Best, this was a contract year. We were not correct. Aaron Best has this weird feature in his contract, which was it was signed in 2019 as a 5-year deal. What happens in his contract is it has a rollover clause. And if you're thinking, okay, Marcel, what in God's name is a rollover clause? Essentially, the verbiage of the contract is that unless Eastern says they're not rolling the contract over, that 5-year contract essentially restarts at the end of every year unless Eastern tells Best, hey, we're not rolling it over. So for 2022 and 2023, Eastern did not notify Best that they're not rolling the contract over, which of course Eastern knew the verbiage of the contract. They helped write it. So this year, 2024, is the first year of not rolling that contract over, which means even though Best signed that 5-year deal back in 2019, it's just rolled over. So he has a 5-year contract that is written as though it started this season. So Best is set to be there for a while. So we've self-corrected. So that completely changes the narrative of a little bit of what we thought about Eastern. With that said, Patty, your Eastern grade and why?
Yeah, so just to clarify a little bit, Best contract runs through February 2028, which makes it a lot harder to move on from leadership if that was something that we thought was going to happen.
No. Which February 2028 means it lasts through the 2027 season.
Yep. So Eastern grade, I think it's a C. I mean, maybe a generous C. The thing with Eastern is I think they're kind of on the opposite end of Idaho State, where I feel like Eastern came into the year with, at least from some people, some sort of expectations. You bring back your entire offensive line plus literally the best receiver in the country, and you would hope that, plus the schedule that Eastern had, they had a very favorable schedule, very favorable out of conference, very favorable going into what could have been a bubble playoff situation. And they turned that into a 4-8 season, losing to Drake. That is pretty dang bad. But there was some improvements in certain areas that, were big problems last year that maybe weren't as big of problems this year. So it's kind of a mixing of like, it feels like Eastern way underperformed, but they also improved in some areas. C.
I'm going C-. I want to go lower, but I think they need to be graded similar to where Idaho State is for like they got to the same spot for different reasons. So offensively, Eastern was good in conference play. They were flat out good, 39 points a game. Efton Chisholm, if he is not a first-team All-American, then like the award is completely irrelevant. Efton Chisholm in conference play, he led the league in receptions with 81 catches. The number 2 receiver, as far as like catches in conference play, was Jeff Weimer for Idaho State at 59. So yeah, 81-59 is the gap between the number 1, number 2 receiver. So like Eastern was producing offensively. They were just in a similar situation to Idaho State of they stopped absolutely no one. And again, in particular on the ground, they stopped absolutely no one. Eastern, I felt, did the least with the most in the entire conference as far as talent. So like that's part of why I grade them a little bit lower than Idaho State, but they beat Idaho State, and their Eastern's on a kind of upward trajectory compared to where they were last season. But I feel like Idaho State's objectively upward compared to last year. Franklin, your Eastern thoughts?
Yeah, I think Eastern, I would grade them a C. I would say they're in the same boat. They lack defense, but their offense is there, and they had a lot of really good players on their team, like Efton Chisholm, and they did have some tough losses at the beginning of the year. So Drake, that's a Pioneer League team. Probably shouldn't lose to a team like that. And
hot take for Franklin: the Big Sky teams need to not lose to non-scholarship teams.
I don't think that's a hot take at all, man. Like
it's not, dude. It's not.
Yeah. So, and then I think their red field does bring it down a little bit, the grade, but we can ramble about that for hours. But no, I think definitely they're more upwards than last year. I'm interested to see what Aaron Best can do, this upcoming year. But no, their offense is good. Just didn't have the defense to complement them.
And Eastern, hot take, guy, like actual hot take. By varying sources close within the Big Sky, Eastern used to be a great school to be at to kind of launch your coaching career as far as like being a coordinator. That's not what Eastern's been the last couple of years. And kind of one of the like critiques of Aaron Best that I had been told by people close to like different Big Sky sources is, hey, sometimes Best is touchy about needing to be the smartest person in the room. And I think defensively, Best needs to find a way to get better guys so they can get back to at least at the coordinator position. So they can get that Eastern can try to at least get back to that understanding of, as an assistant coach, Eastern's a great place to be because it'll launch your career upward. That it's hard to do worse than what Eastern did defensively. Idaho State pulled it off, but Idaho State fired their DC, right? So they did the thing you would hope they do if that's your results. Let's just be very brief on Weber and Portland State. I find Portland State not interesting at all because look, they're losing Sachere. That's a huge loss. Usually Portland State's able to get enough talent because of where they're at, and Bruce Barnum isn't like a catastrophe as a coach. Portland State was born to be a floundering 3-5-ish in Big Sky play team. That's just who they are. So I don't care about Portland State. Quick Weber State thoughts, Franklin.
I think I grade them as C-. I mean, they're definitely in the downwards trajectory. I mean, they got fans like calling to fire the head coach, and they're just I don't think I've ever seen a more inconsistent team this year. You know, beat Montana, and then you lose to Northern Colorado for UNC's only win of the season, and then lose to Sac State in double overtime. I didn't watch too many games, but I did watch the game that they played against Idaho State in person, and especially losing at home to Idaho State for the first time in 40 years takes a hit at your grade, you know, especially, I mean, that doesn't happen. So,
no, halfway through the season, Weber looked like a playoff team if they could have like won a couple of those close games. But to close the year out, Weber goes after beating Montana in Missoula in overtime, 55-48. Weber loses 5 out of their last 6, including 5 in a row. It took playing Cal Poly to get back into the winning side. So I'm going to say, C. This is C- D+ range for me, buttressed only by the fact that there is some talent at Weber where you could understand this team looking a little bit better this year. But Weber was they were a sad story to me, Patty. So like your Weber State thoughts, Patty.
Yeah, I'm right at C- because they're similar to they remind me a lot of Eastern, but they even performed really worse than Eastern this year. And I mean, maybe they don't have the same star level receiver like a Chisholm, but they had one of the best defensive players in the whole conference, and their defense sucked this year. So like, I don't know.
It was terrible.
It was really bad, and we saw like hints of it early in the season, but it really wasn't good at all this year. Felt like that was in previous years, the strength of the team has always been defense. Weber will always have a good defense, and they didn't have that. It just seems like crazy downward trajectory. They
lost some pretty big talent in the transfer portal from last season, and clearly were not able to replace it.
And the other thing with them is it felt like they what was the weird thing that ETSU's coach said? Like we grabbed a defeat in the jaws of victory or something stupid like that. They lost like 3 games that they had leads like super late or obvious chances to take the lead, like having the ball at the 1-inch line on 4th and 1 and not kicking a field goal to go ahead at the end of the game. Like just crazy decisions that led them to where they are.
Their first 4 losses were combined like 10 points.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But after those 4 losses, the wheels fell off.
Yeah. I mean, they also like lost to Lamar, who from when I don't think they're a very good team this season, are they? I mean, they did beat McNeese. Yeah,
they're a frisky Southland team. They're not good. They had some injury issues that really derailed their season. They probably would have been a better team, but they're not good.
They finished 7-5 on the year. Lamar's on a clear upward trajectory because they were Franklin. They were a catastrophe in 2023. That's why they fired their coach. Yeah. But the Lamar loss is not awful for a solid Big Sky team. you'd call that a not good loss, but in the scope of FCS football, you would not call losing to Lamar a terrible loss. Now, you would call losing to Northern Colorado a terrible loss.
Yeah. I mean, Lamar, a Southland team, Lamar could be like a Northern Arizona or like even like Idaho State type level for 7-5. You have the 5 wins. But I don't know. I think I'll take my C- back and do D+ because you're also looking at, a similar situation to Sac State losing. Like Sac State lost Troy Taylor, they lost Jay Hill, and their new coach is just not. I mean, he inherited so much, but hasn't turned that program around. So I'm taking it back D+.
Well, he has. Mickey Mental has turned the program around, just not in the direction you want to be turned around. It's a complete 180 of Weber State. They were not a bad offensive team. Like Weber State scored in conference play 32 a game. That was good for number 4 in conference play on the year. That's not terrible. It's just that the Weber State team we thought we knew from even 3 years ago, which is not that long ago, it doesn't exist. So no, Mickey Mental's got a lot of work to do. And I also just think sometimes, talent isn't everything. Like some of it's also like the team, like buying, like having things go right. The team buying into what the coach is doing, getting the right breaks. There's a handful of reasons why teams do what they do. I think that those 4 early losses were clearly demoralizing to this Weber State team because again, like the wheels fell off in the second half season. All right, now we have the top 5 teams, not Portland State top 5, the actual top 5 teams to talk about. Before we do that, got to get a word from show sponsor Snake River Stampede Canadian Whiskey. Look, it's one of the best whiskeys you can get in the state of Idaho, especially as a bargain whiskey buy, like $25 a bottle. It's a double barrel finish, first fill bourbon, then finished in Oloroso sherry casks. It's a three grain whiskey, 80% corn, 10% rye, 10% malted barley. You will never find my house without at least 1, usually 2 bottles of Snake River Stampede. So if you haven't tried one yet, man, you got to grab yourself a Snake River. Next, we're going through these teams not in rankings, guys. We're just walking up the standings. The next team in Big Sky Conference standings to talk about is your Montana Grizzlies. Finish 8-4 on the season, 5-3 in Big Sky play. Made the playoffs as a 14 seed. They're hosting Tennessee State this weekend. Franklin, your Montana grade.
Writing this down, I think B. But honestly, I'm leaning more towards B-, coming off of the national runner-up year, and just having it really kind of is a program turnaround. Like I was honestly thinking that Montana might not make the conference. The Big Sky might not get like 5 bids, or not the conference, the playoffs. The Big Sky might not get 5 bids, but I mean. They've been playing catch up all season. North Dakota. They should have lost, or did they lose that game? They lost. Game. They did. They lost to North Dakota. They lost to Weber State. I think they had to play catch up with West Carolina and Missouri State. Just having a not good season. And then I think all their 2 of their losses came at home. They had 8 home games this season, so they definitely should have done a lot better, especially at Wagriz. They have that advantage. Just no defense. I'm surprised that they made the playoffs with the seed that they had, or even are like a top 10, 12 team. But yeah, I'm leaning more on a B-.
Now, one stat correction. They had 8 home games, but your point's taken. 4 home games in conference play, 3 in the out of conference. Most teams don't get that many home games. The other points stand. Patty, Montana.
Yeah, I'm B-. I think they, of the top 5 teams in the conference, I think Montana did the least with the most talent. They
over the least with the most. You're saying that over Sac State and
of the top 5 teams.
Oh, my bad.
The top 5 teams. Okay. That's I tried to make sure to make that clear there.
Forgive me.
The reason for it, they kept everyone on the offensive side of the ball from that title run. They lost a lot defensively, which does matter, and that was definitely the weakness of the team. But there was games where I felt like the offense is what let them down. Like the North Dakota game, the offense let them down. And the offense returned, Junior Bergen. They returned what's the running back's name? Eli Gilman. They returned a lot of really good skill talent, and they just didn't do much with it. Eventually, they got the offense going, but by that point in the year, the defense was just playing horrible. Teams figured out how to expose the Grizz defense, and teams are really taking it to the defense of the Grizz. So, I feel like they're a team with a lot of talent on them. They remind me of a Bo Baldwin team. You said this all year, Ryan. Like, they remind me of a Bo Baldwin team where they just have to outscore teams. And, overall, 8-4, I feel like most teams in the Big Sky would be super happy with an 8-4 season. But when you're coming off of a national title run and you return so much offensively, when, I feel like a lot of last year, the offense was what kind of was the weakness of the team. That's kind of where I get that notion from. But overall, they're hosting a game in the playoffs. You can't be too upset. So B-, B. I'll stick with the B- though.
I'm gonna stick with B, but it's right on the cusp of B to B-. Gonna hit the comment section for a couple things. Eric Stang saying defense for Montana got better as the season went on. We have Ron saying the Grizz have no QB or defense. Brad Smith, demerit for Houck's decisiveness about the quarterback. Ron, MSU beat the Grizzlies with a redshirt freshman running back from Missoula who ran for 197 yards. Eric Stang, agree, Patty, too much horizontal play calling versus vertical play calling on offense. So, the reason why a B is the grade is if you make the playoffs and if you get to host a playoff game, Idaho State and Eastern, you guys would be pretty stoked if that was your fate, right? But I agree with what you're saying, Patty, of Montana left a lot on the table this year, it feels like. One, Houck not settling on a starter until week 12, week 13. No, yeah, sorry, week 13. So it was 12 game season. Indefensible. Indefensibly stupid. And it wasn't like this was a hard call. Like whatever happened in camp, Logan Fife was better once the lights actually came on. And it was not particularly close throughout the season. So one, that just shocking, that level of quarterback mismanagement, because Houck's not a bad coach. Now, like every coach, he has his strengths, he has his weaknesses, and developing quarterbacks is quite obviously where you'd say the weaknesses.
Yeah. If I want to pitch in, especially not choosing week 12, Idaho State had a similar situation where they threw Jordan Cook in that first game, but Hawkins chose his quarterback, is okay, it's Kobe Tracy. It's going to be Kobe Tracy. And our season was probably it's significantly better than it would have been if we were switching around like we did last year. Hawk didn't do that.
No, well, Hawk did what would be normal if you're not settled on who your quarterback is exactly out of camp. You would say, okay, we've got the out of conference play. We have to have this thing answered by out of conference play. And that works. Hey, I've been in Idaho when coaches had to do that. And that's so long as you eventually get an identity, that's what you need to get. That's the big deal, right? So that part completely indefensible. And I guess the biggest shock to me was the step Montana took backwards defensively, because that is special teams defense had been Bobby Houck's calling card forever, both at Montana and at his other stops. That's the guy he is. That's his expertise. So Montana taking that far of a step backward, flooring. And also, like Patty, you said, I just want to make a different point on this. Not capitalizing the offensively, not tailoring the offense to the strengths of the team, to me, just flooring. And hey, one of the things I'm going to bring up, Eli Gilman didn't even lead the team in rushing. Nick Ostmo did. And I think Eli Gilman's the more talented back, but that's just an example to me of whatever Montana thinks they're trying to do offensively. I feel like it's far too rigid. And I know, hey, they averaged over 30 points a game in conference play. So that part was not awful, but it was also very hot, cold on the season. They had some very hot games, usually against some of the worst defenses. And Montana also had some cold games. Yeah, we saw that finger point there. Viewers saw Patty pointing to his Eastern hat for that being a game where Montana put up points. But yeah, the expectations, I didn't actually hear much Grizz fans heading into the Montana State game really honestly felt like Montana didn't have much heart at the fan base heading into this game, just because I think everyone knew they're gonna get their asses kicked. So I don't know, like try to not take it as seriously this year, which mental health wise is the right call. So we're done talking Montana. The next team, interested to see how we grade this team. Northern Arizona finished with a bit better Big Sky record than Montana. They go 6-2 in conference, 8-4 overall. I'm going to call that 7-4 because scheduling Lincoln, who is part of God knows what conference and God knows what division, should actually be should subtract a win from Northern Arizona's season. And another asterisk, Northern Arizona did dodge both UC Davis and Montana State this year. However, they caught Montana without their starting quarterback. So understand, but take your own interpretation from that as you will. But NAU makes the playoffs under first-year coach Brian Wright. Now, Wright did inherit a team that went 5-3 Big Sky play last year. However, when coaches turn over in the transfer portal era, we also lose a shit ton of players. So that doesn't necessarily mean that much, but it doesn't necessarily mean nothing. Franklin, your NAU grade.
I'm gonna put it same B-. Now, scheduling Lincoln's not a good team. They're not even NCAA, are they? They're just a team that, what is it? Bishop Sycamore. So they're out there. But I mean, I don't think they really have a good win. Utah Tech, 1 win on the season. Sacramento State, obviously not a good team. They shouldn't have beat Idaho State, in my opinion, but that's up to you guys. Weber State, I would say that's their best win. Maybe Eastern Washington, but I don't feel like they've really. I feel like they've really had a cupcake schedule. This season. They played Arizona and Montana, but they lost those games, so they didn't win where it really mattered. To deserve their ranking or to deserve their playoff spot, in my opinion. But yeah, no, I've only watched their Northern Arizona game and then that Utah Tech game. Or the Idaho State and then the Utah Tech game. So I don't think they should have won Idaho State, and Utah Tech is a cupcake of a team. They've only had 1 win on the season, Northern Colorado type stuff, especially in the WAC. So I don't know. I put it at a B-. I don't think they're going to beat Abilene Christian in the first round of the playoffs at all.
Patty, your thoughts?
I'd give them a B. And big reason for it, I agree with the cupcake schedule for sure.
Yes, but 0 wins against teams over 500. And Franklin's 100% right. There is not a, if based off of Big Sky understanding of FCS, 0 quality wins at all on the season. Now, there are some teams who a Big Sky win, even if it's a sub 500 Big Sky win, you'd call that good, but that doesn't matter for our purposes because we're only talking Big Sky teams. No wins against teams over 500. Back to you, Patty.
I just think making the playoffs with a first-year head coach deserves a B. That's the main reason why I give them a B. Their schedule wasn't super impressive, but I do think the eye test that team looks to me better than they ever were under Chris Ball. There was years where Chris Ball had really good teams, but I think the model that Brian Wright is building with that team is just a lot more sustainable and a lot better to be a good team year in, year out in the Big Sky. I think the trajectory looks up to me right now, and making the playoffs in the first year, like I said, it's just that's a positive thing. Also, I think NAU should really be thanking Idaho State right now because I think the team that might have taken their spot if they didn't lose to Idaho State is Southern Utah. So shout out to the Bengals for that.
Man, NAU to me, we have to give an actual grade, but just as Eric Stang says in the comments section, never a good sign when Brian starts dropping asterisks. You have to, when we talk about teams maybe over or underperforming to understand their future understanding, NAU's on the same watch next year that Idaho State was on for me this year. They had some breaks. NAU had some breaks that got them to where we are. Franklin, you covered them quite well. The scheduling gods really helped NAU out. But you play the games that you play, and that's it. And to me, if you make the playoffs, it's hard to have a grade worse than a B. If you're NAU, who hasn't been to the playoffs since 2017 or something like that, that's a big deal for the program. Like Nick Weber saying, NAU gave me some Idaho 2022 vibes. Nick, when you say that, you mean kind of like what Patty said of hey, the team looks tougher. They look like they look like they're more together. They look like they're playing a style of football that is going to succeed in the Big Sky, in the current era of Big Sky play we're in. Nick, I'm with you. NAU, again, scheduling helped here. NAU shockingly had the number 2 scoring defense in the conference, gave up 17 points a game, and the number 1 total defense in the conference. Now, NAU, when I saw them play Idaho, they did not pop off as being better than Montana State defensively, not remotely close. But NAU did not look terrible defensively. So I'm going to go with a B, but I'm going to say there's going to be some healthy skepticism for NAU next year. We're not talking about 2025 schedules, but whenever we get to that point and look at it, it's hard to have an easier conference schedule than what NAU had this season. So the benefit, though, is, hey, when you're given breaks, you got to take advantage. And NAU did, right? So whatever, they're in the playoffs. That's a B. Franklin, you're not buying it. You're not buying it. I see that.
I mean, I'm just thinking about the Idaho State game, man. They shouldn't have won that. The refs, I mean, even the Big Sky released a statement about the officiating. So, but yeah, I mean, I would say that they're the same level, or like they can compete, but I don't think that their schedules, really reflects the level that they're actually at.
Okay, so just to get to your point, to make it more narrow, I'm looking at the Idaho State schedule, and Idaho State didn't play Davis. They had Montana State on there, but so you're saying, hey, subtract Montana State from this schedule, and subtract Idaho or something like that, and replace them with 2 underwater teams. You're saying, yeah, I feel like Idaho State could have been NAU had they been given this type of scheduling assist too. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, I definitely think that they're the same level of ISU. So
okay, and hey, the close game does not would not disprove what you just said. So okay, we're mostly B. We're on average we are skeptical B to B minuses on NAU. Idaho guys. So the Vandals. Look, hey, they're the number 8 seed, which, hey, I think that's bullshit. That should have been 2 seed. Idaho finishes 9-3 on the season, 6-2 overall in Big Sky play. Their 3 losses are to number 1 FBS Oregon, number 1 FCS Montana State, and number 5 seed UC Davis with their 3rd string quarterback, at the time 2nd string, who Idaho should have won that game. They gave that away. So, all right. Franklin, I'm going to throw Idaho to you first because you got to see the Vandals with Jack Lane playing, and you can't talk about the story of Idaho season without acknowledging the Vandals did what they did schedule-wise without their starting quarterback for the majority of the season, including the toughest part of their schedule too. So, Franklin, your Idaho grade.
So naturally, as an Idaho State fan, I hate watch the Vandals hoping for a loss all the time. So I mean, I had to give them an A, if not an A plus, in between A plus and A. But I mean, they don't have a bad loss. They lost to Oregon, like you said, Montana State, UC Davis. Montana State's really good. UC Davis is, I mean, I think should have won. I predicted UC Davis to win the conference at the beginning of the year. They got really darn close to it. But I mean, to do what they were able to do, I mean, they played Oregon. They probably shouldn't have been that close because, I mean, they injured all their players in the process. Jack Lane. I mean,
I would trade an Oregon blowout for a few fewer injuries.
Sure. I mean, I've been saying this for a while. I'm like, if a game is unwinnable, don't try to win it. Keep your players healthy. And so I think that's one of the biggest reasons why they were so close to Oregon. But I mean, just battling all the injuries in the running back room and the quarterback room, they definitely did a good job. Especially with how many road games they had against opponents. Abilene wasn't that good, but Abilene Christian's a darn good team. And keeping it close with teams at home kind of like takes the A plus off of it for me. But I give them an A. They're a really good team. They have a lot of depth, and their defense and their line is really good, and they're able to adjust to a lot of things. So
I also think, Franklin, you just gave the case the committee probably had for bumping Idaho is in spite of winning all those games after the October 30th rankings, there were some games against lower teams that on paper were closer than they should have been. Now I say on paper because like a lot of those games just had weird things at the end that made the game feel close when the game was essentially over. But you do that repeatedly, unless you're super in the weeds. What does that look like? It looks like underperformance. So I think that what you said, I enunciate differently, but I think that is essentially why the committee rated Idaho where they were. Patty, your thoughts? Sorry, Franklin, you're about to say something. Go ahead.
I mean, like, I think an A seed is good for them, honestly. You know, you get to play Richmond or Lehigh, and so that's a guaranteed win at home. So, and then the Montana State rematch.
I mean, hey, all things considered, it's if you get a first round bye, it's hard to do anything other than an A. Patty, your Idaho take.
Right, I'm right around an A minus. Right, I think the only reason I give it an A minus is because I felt like, it's the Davis game. I feel like the Davis game is the difference between an A and an A minus for Idaho, and you win that game, all of a sudden Idaho's probably top 5 seed, maybe even a 4. And at that point, and that things totally changed there. But, the injuries were massive this year for Idaho. And you really got to tip your cap to Jason Eck, because 9-3 with the schedule that Idaho played is pretty damn impressive when you're down your number 1 quarterback, you're down 2 of your starting corners most of the year. You lose your 2 best D linemen for sections of the season. Half your offensive line is out for the year.
Yeah, they lost 3 starting O-linemen. They lost 3 starting O-linemen for the year within the first 2 weeks.
Yeah, and you lose 3 or 4 running backs. Like, going into the playoffs, I wonder if injuries is a part of why, maybe they dropped a couple spots just because of like the running back injuries. But also, like, I still just, the resumes don't make sense why Mercer and Cardinal were jumped them. But anyways, we're not going to rant about that too much. But I just think overall for the circumstances that Idaho is in, this is a dang good season. And you feel like if a couple things went another way, this Idaho team's probably looking at top 5 seed if you have better health, and a better health luck type of season, and a couple bounces go your way, especially the Davis game. So I give it an A minus, just a little bit under what they could have been.
I mean, you got to give it to the Vandals playing their hardest games, being Montana State, Davis, and Idaho State on the road. So, I mean, that is the difficulty. They played all their easy games at home. So,
yeah, I mean, hey, they traveled to Abilene Christian for the game earlier in the year too. So, yeah, to try to just add a little bit more to what you guys brought up. One, Patty, you covered the injuries, but just the quarterback injuries this year were just preposterous for Idaho. Because by the time Idaho was playing at Montana State, Nick Josephek had won the number 2 spot while Lane was out. Then he broke his collarbone against Montana State. So then he's out for the year. So then they're back to Wagner at number 3. Now Lane's back, but like, essentially Lane being back fixed the offense, guys. I mean, the Idaho over their last 5 games. Now, one of those counts a Wagner start. Well, no, sorry, 2 of those count Wagner starts. But the last 5 games, Idaho's averaging 36.4 points per game. That's a complete turnaround from where Idaho early on. The part of why they played close games is because they couldn't score. So they just couldn't separate. So that part fixed for Idaho. I think Jason Eck's not going to get Coach of the Year. He's not going to be the Big Sky Coach of the Year. He's not nominated for the Eddie Robinson Award. I'm happy to have that be the case because I do not want Eck getting any more national profile than he needs right now. But I don't think that Brent Vegan winning Big Sky Coach of the Year or Tim Plow winning it should be unanimous. There should at least be a couple votes to me for Jason Eck for the job that he did at Idaho, weathering the storm of injuries the Vandals did. And I mean, just the other thing, us Vandals were not anxious about the amount of transfers and graduation the amount of talent that left because of transfers and graduation last season. We were not anxious if you were like really close to the program, but like, hey, if you're following from afar, like not in Moscow, Franklin, you see Idaho lose all those guys from the 4 seed last year and weather all the storm of injuries to finish at the 8 seed. That's not too bad, man. That's a good season. So I'm going to go A for the 8 seed, and everyone in the comment section largely agreeing. So, hey, Dane Moon says Idaho A, Eric Stang 8 seed is criminal. Ron, Mercer jumped them, Idaho, for beating Furman. So much for SOS. Good point. Patty Frakes issued a couple things. Incarnate Word was 10-2, losses to South Dakota State and Southern Illinois, but they also beat NAU 38-14. Eric Stang, Vandals A+ for overcoming much adversity with a real tough schedule. And then Ron, I thought the committee wasn't doing regional rankings, whatever. We're moving on. We're all Idaho is some version of an A. The next two are quite obviously versions of an A. So I guess with UC Davis, Franklin, what stood out about Davis to you this season?
I mean, just being from, Southern Idaho, I knew kind of knew Tim Plow was going to be a good coach. They had a lot of good players. Miles Hastings is a great player, but Tim Plow.
Can I pause? Yeah, okay, sorry. You got there. I was about to enunciate that, saying if you guys don't know about Southern Idaho Connection, Tim Plow he coached with Dan Hawkins previously. Plow had been a long time OC in the Big Sky world. He was an OC at NAU prior to UC Davis, but also he was over at Boise State as the OC for Andy Avalos, and Andy Avalos essentially put handcuffs on him the entire time. And hey, what did not work for Boise State sure as hell worked for Davis. Things are looking good with Tim Plow there right now. Back to you.
Yeah. So you nailed it. He coached at Boise State, and Andy Avalos, we all know, is a terrible person. And it doesn't look like he's doing good at TCU right now anyways. But I kind of thought that he was actually going to flourish, especially with a team that he inherited at UC Davis, with that previously coached by Dan Hawkins. He develops players, and they have some of the best running backs, some of the best defense, and probably the best player in what might be like FCS football on the offensive side. And so I saw this, and I saw their schedule, and they played their hardest games at home, and I just kind of thought that they're gonna pull it out, win the Big Sky, and they got really darn close. So I mean, do you want me to grade them? I mean, I'll give them an A+ for that.
Which, Patty, before I ask you about Davis, question for both of you. First Franklin, then Patty. You brought up indirectly, didn't name him, Land Larison. Is who you're talking about when you say the best player in maybe all of college football, right? That's who you're talking about, Franklin?
No.
FCS.
FCS, the best player being Hastings.
Okay. So Miles Hastings is the guy you were talking about.
Yep.
Miles Hastings, quarterback for UC Davis, had what you might call a rebound year. Had a great 2022, kind of okay 2023. But then this season, hey, Miles Hastings, top passer in the Big Sky, 26 touchdowns, 3 picks, over 330 yards passing per game. So easily the best quarterback in the Big Sky on the year. So that actually leads to this question for first Franklin, then Patty. Is your offensive player of the year in the Big Sky on UC Davis, and who is it?
I mean, it's Miles Hastings. He has 3,700 passing yards, and running that as there weren't primarily a passing. They're heavy on the passing, but they also run the ball quite a bit. And then just when you throw the ball that much, only having 3 picks on the season is really impressive. And one of those, I think actually 2 of those being against a really good Montana State team at the end when you're desperate to win a game.
So, Patty, is your offensive player of the year on Davis? And if he is, who is it?
Yeah, for me, it's Land Larison. And I think Land Larison has a legitimate case to the Walter Payton Award this year, because for most of the year, I don't know if it's still true now, he led Davis in receiving, he led Davis in rushing yards, and right now in all-purpose, I think he's top 5 in the conference in all-purpose yards, behind honestly one of the worst offensive lines in the conference. Larison did some incredible things this year.
Let me answer your in Big Sky play. Land Larison, as far as UC Davis receivers, he was the number 2 in total catches, but he led the team in receiving yards at 559 receiving yards.
which is just that plus. Do you have it up? How many rushing yards did he have? It was over
Yeah,
1,000.
in Big Sky on the season over 1,000 in Big Sky play, just under that's 8 games, just 928 rushing yards in Big Sky play, 116 yards per game on the ground, plus receiving yards. He was at 70 receiving yards per game, so he's in the 200 yards accrued per game.
Yeah, that's insane. He would get my vote for Big Sky Offensive Player of the Year. I mean, I would take a pretty hard look at him for the Walter Payton Award. Unfortunately, I think that award just goes to quarterbacks nowadays, which kind of sucks. But I mean, I think Land Larson was overall the best player in the Big Sky Conference this year, just because that dude is dominant and he did it behind an offensive line that struggled a lot this year, and it took some. My hat is off to Tim Plow for the way he used Land Larson and got him the ball in space and allowed him to do his thing. Because, the first 3 games of the year, I looked at this Davis offensive line. I was like, oh no, it was bad. They did not play well at all. And the fact that they all of a sudden had the leading rusher in the Big Sky at the end of the year or right up there, that's pretty dang impressive.
So my answer to the player of the year is I'm going to go Larison, but I do think Hastings makes it interesting because I think Tommy Malot's going to get some sort of acknowledgement as co-offensive player of the year or first team quarterback. But if I could draft a quarterback for Idaho today and I had the entire conference to pick from, it would be you had to pick a quarterback for one game to win you a single game this year. You'd pick Miles Hastings as far as a pure passer, easily the best passer in the Big Sky. But I think just what Larison did with how diverse he was as an offensive threat, I don't think you just don't see a guy like that every year, but both are damn good. Big takeaway for me with Davis is, hey, co-sign everything you guys said. Davis was great on both sides of the ball. Getting the Connors brothers back after those first few weeks in the season really turned that UC Davis defense into something. They went from just being pretty solid to being tough and being one of the best defenses in the Big Sky. So yeah, hard to give them anything other than an A to A+. If you're maybe what I'd say is the only reason I don't give them an A+ is they're not in that top 4 where they get a host through the quarters. Maybe that's only a demerit. That's not exactly their fault, which leads us to Montana State. After we talk about show sponsor Hughes River Expedition, which if you're looking for a great all-inclusive week-long vacation, don't look past your backyard. Hughes River Expeditions has been Vandal owned and operated since 1976 and are ready to take you on vacation of a lifetime. Enjoy a multi-day trip down the Middle Fork of the Salmon, the main Salmon River no return, the Salmon River Canyons, or the Selway. Check out special trips like the one to see the Perseid Meteor Shower, camp on pristine bitches, run amazing whitewater, hike scenic trails, spot wildlife, soak in beautiful natural hot springs, and fish some of the most remote stretches of river in the country. You just bring your clothes, let HRE handle the rest. So grab a paddle, catch dinner, and ride the bull all throughout the Gem State. Call them now at 406-540-4450 or check them out at hughesriver.com. Montana State, undefeated. They're the number 1 seed in the playoffs. Your thoughts, Franklin? Your thoughts, Batty, while Franklin gets his stuff.
No. Montana State's just an A+. They seriously they outperformed my expectations for them. I thought they were a good team, but I didn't think they were this good. It's hard to do any worse than A+ with a 12-0 season, 1 seed going into the playoffs. Road to Frisco goes through Bozeman, and the way that the bracket lines up, I think they have a pretty dang good chance to kind of walk to the semifinals. Yeah, they got to beat Idaho, but also they beat Idaho by 30 earlier this year.
Jack Lane, in theory, would be present for that matchup.
It's true. I'm still picking Montana State in that game. But anyways, they offensively, I think they're one of the best offensive teams in the country. The defense looks way better than they did last year. This team, the only close game they played this year was against a decent FBS school that is going to a bowl game, and UC Davis, who's the 5 seed on the road in a game which they had a 30-8 lead. I think they have a chance to have, the first team all Big Sky quarterback. They have a chance to win freshman of the year at running back. They have a chance to basically have the entire offensive line on the first team Big Sky. They seriously look like, to me, they look like the most complete team in the country all year long. And that's a recipe for an A+.
All right, Franklin,
I mean, a lot of people at the beginning of the season were talking about how like a cupcake Montana State schedule was. They didn't play anybody. I think that first game, people need to put respect on that game. It's a Bronco Mendenhall coach New Mexico team. And, they're a lot better than New Mexico that we've seen in the past. I mean, they just beat Washington State, who is a really like darn good team. That's a ranked win for New Mexico. But just their wins on at home against Idaho, on the road against a really tough UC Davis team, and then also just wiping the table, with being 12-0, winning that rivalry game. Rivalry games can be tough sometimes, but winning it that handily is really impressive, even though it is at home. But that's something Montana State hasn't really done before, and you can't be a 1 seed ranked number 1 in the country and not have an A+ grade. You can't fail expectations being the number 1 team in the country. And it's just that simple. They're a good team. They play good teams. And I think that, they're the favorite to win the Natty.
Eric staying in the comments section, agreeing with you, Franklin, saying MSU A++, new O-line. Adam Jones is a Jerry Rice Award finalist. D-line is very, very good and underrated. Week 0 to 12-0, and Tommy Mellott is better than given credit for. Hey, all those points. Tommy Mellott definitely shown he's developed as a passer over his. He seems like it feels like he's been in Montana State for 25 years, but. Mellott is clearly developed. I mean, when he first started there, he essentially never passed at all. And now he's not the best quarterback in the Big Sky, but he's one of the best quarterbacks. And for what Montana State needs him to do, he does quite well. So yeah, credit for Mellott developing there. What stood out to me about Montana State, obviously that's a great offensive team. That's Brent Vigen's background, is as being an OC previously. That Montana State defense against Idaho was shockingly good, like shockingly aggressive. That is kind of what really, after that game, that's the part of Montana State that made me think, yeah, they could win a title this year, can't they? Like they're tough, and the teams who are seeing Montana State in the playoffs, they're gonna have to travel and deal with some shitty weather, and that plays exactly into what Montana State wants to do anyway. Yeah, it's tough to do anything other than just give credit for Montana State just absolutely kicking ass this year. And I mean, hey, you guys talked about Adam Jones as being he's a freshman on the Jerry Rice Award watch list. Well, he's their second best running back. Scott Trey Humphrey rushed for over 1,000 yards this year. Both Humphrey and Jones averaged over 7 yards a carry. And maybe the biggest thing this year that mattered for Montana State is they kept Mellott upright. And he didn't take that many hits. Mellott was not rushing the ball nearly as much this season. I'm curious if that changes in the playoffs, because we're no longer that concerned about avoiding injury, especially as you get further in. But just the point is to win. But I mean, what could Montana State have done better this year? I mean, like you said, Franklin, their FBS win aged quite well. New Mexico is. The Montana State's FBS win aged much better than Idaho's FBS win. Like that's pretty obvious. I guess my hope is that Brent Vigen wins Coach of the Year and has enough national profile that maybe there's someone else in Bozeman next year, because Vigen clearly knows what he's doing, and it's going to be with what he's got humming there at Montana State. It's hard to imagine them being anything but just good. To very great. I mean, honestly, with how Montana State in 2023 the Bozeman fans are pissed with how 2023 ended. That team clearly, they got it together this year and actualized on every bit of the potential you might say they missed out on in 2023. So, yeah, that's A+. Don't know how to grade that any different. Before we call night, one. Support the show, patreon.com/Tubs at the Club. Got for as little as a cup of coffee a month. You can join, honestly, like the best online place to talk Vandal sports. But we talk Big Sky sports too, Franklin. So if you ever decide you need to, man, we would love to have you in the #OnlyTubs Discord. Best place to talk Vandal sports and other sports online as well. So before we call it a night, because I have both of you two on here, other than grades, are there any Big Sky stories to you that kind of define this season that you think are worth addressing? Or do you think, well, no, the stories are the grades and the grades are covered?
I think we should talk about Defensive Player of the Year a little bit.
Okay, let's talk. We can talk Defensive Player of the Year. Now, I got to tell you, I think that is a way tougher discussion than Offensive Player of the Year. We had the offensive discussion in like 4 seconds because there's pretty much 3 names to pay attention to: Landon Larson, Tommy Millott, and Miles Hastings. Franklin, thanks for bringing up the Miles Hastings as speaking that into existence discussion for Offensive Player of the Year, because Hastings had a great season. I think it's kind of tough to know exactly where we're going to go Defensive Player of the Year, because some of the guys who have some of the like more eye-popping stats defensively, they're either on teams that were not like quite as good, or I don't know, like Malachi Williams for Idaho. He's an edge rusher. He leads the Big Sky in sacks. Malachi Williams is a good player, but like he's clearly not I don't think he's the best, edge rusher in the Big Sky. So I don't know. To me, this is much harder award to parse out, just based off of one guy really dominating on the season. But Patty, since you brought it up, do you have some guys in mind for Defensive Player of the Year?
Right. So to be clear, you're looking at the conference only stats, correct?
Look at whatever you want to look at. I look at conference only stats just because now it's apples to apples, and we're not parsing like NAU getting 7,000 points against Lincoln.
Yeah, so I mean, Keyshawn James Newby still leads the Big Sky in sacks on the full season, and I think he got almost all those in the first 4 weeks. That's just insane. But I think a couple
had
of
he not been hurt, he would have been the brain dead player. But he did get hurt, and the second half of the season, he wasn't on the field nearly as much.
Right. I think one of the big names you got to talk about, Kamari Bailey, had a ridiculous year this year. He had 18 and a half tackles for loss. And I mean, he was clearly just, he was just so much better than everyone else on that Weber State defense, in my opinion. But you got to look at David Meyer from UC Davis. He was second in total tackles in the Big Sky this year on the full season, second to Idaho's Jackson Eck. But he also was he was tied for first in picks this year at middle linebacker. That's kind of an insane stat. And I wonder if that's going to be enough to give David Meyer the nod. I mean, you're pretty much tied for second in 2 of the more important stats when it comes to that. It's pretty impressive. I think Kamari Bailey's up there. Like I said, Keyshawn James Newby's going to be up there. And then, I mean, Brody Grebe, he doesn't have the numbers that you would expect, mostly because Montana State was so good this year that all their defensive players' numbers are they're totally tanked because they played so many fewer reps on defense than everyone else that it didn't matter. It didn't matter.
You mean when you're beating everyone by 1,000?
When you're beating everyone by 1,000 and your offense is so good that the other team is just 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out, they played so many fewer plays that, I mean, I wonder if Brody Grebe still gets a look at, first team all conference and defense player of the year. If I had a vote, I think I would lean David Meyer because he's up there with a lot of stats, but it's a really hard race to pick.
Franklin.
I have no idea, to be honest. I mean, just looking at the stats, I'm just going to say Rex Connors. But I don't know. Even looking at the stats, it's hard to pick out an Idaho State player for me. But I don't know. I have no idea. So I think I'll just go with what you guys go with.
Yeah, I think it's
defense.
I think it's going to be some combination. I mean, David Meyer, Rex Connors, and Brody Grebe, like you said, Patty, are kind of the names that pop out to me. Montana, it's this is just one you can't just go based off stats. And hey, maybe that's good that eye test defensively is going to be a little bit more of what the coaches, the guys who vote. That maybe is more. I don't know what directs the voting. I will say, just as far as impact, we covered it for a second. When the Connors brothers came back for UC Davis, that completely turned that UC Davis defense around. And so I feel like you can't overstate the impact, like what safety Rex Connors meant for this UC Davis team in Big Sky play. He led the Big Sky in tackles, but also, I mean, he's just good. He's all over the place. I also had he had 2 picks. Everything you said about David Myers correct. And Brody Grebe and that Montana State. The other part to me that's hard to parse a single guy is like when Idaho played Montana State, there wasn't even like one single thing, like one single player that stood out. Like they're just good. Like they're really talented. And then that starts to cannibalize, the individual moments that would make one guy stand out above the other. Ron section saying Brody Grebe was a backup until the starter got hurt, senior too. So I don't know. I feel like the defensive player of the year is way harder to parse, but I feel like we kind of handicapped it. And I wouldn't be shocked if, it's more like the award ends up going to a guy like Grebe from Montana State, where it's more like a de facto, like, hey, we thought you're the best player on the easily best defense in the conference. But if I had to pick one, because we have a show doing that, I'd say Rex Connors. With that said, guys, hour and 15. This is probably Franklin. Mercifully, Franklin is not as old as Grandpa Brian over here, so he's not that fatigued. But I gotta say, man, I'm gonna miss doing this all conference show. Glad that we could finally get you on here, Franklin. Patty, it's been fun doing it. I used to do this solo. It's a lot more fun to do this with people. The number of live viewers is going up, so I seem to agree that having more people here is a lot more fun. I guess the football season just goes by so damn fast, man. It's just shocking. Now we got like 9 months to wait for the whole thing to start again.
Really fast for me and Patty.
Yeah.
Well, it's really fast when, Franklin, maybe I'm curious your take on this though. Like, hey, when the season's fun, it does fly by. But like for you, what year are you at Idaho State?
This is my second year at ISU, but I've been following the team for like 3 or 4.
Okay.
So
how fast was this compared to the Charlie Ragle year?
It just went by fast. Charlie Ragle is just. It took too long because I hated that guy. We had to get rid of him, but I didn't even go to games when Charlie Ragle was coach. So but that's how bad he was, and I don't miss games for usually like any team. I'm a huge football fan, so yeah.
So you're saying Ragle freed up your time to follow your Boise State Broncos?
McLean likes to say I glaze him a little bit, but I'm just a football fan. I would say I like Utah just as much as Boise, but Idaho State's like way up here for me. I like FCS environment so much better.
Yeah. I've come to love the FCS. I grew up in a Montana household, so like I like my first Idaho game was actually going as a Montana fan back in '95. Mm-hmm. But anyway, Patty, thanks for doing the show with me. I don't think the season went quite as fast for you, but but you're also a football nerd, so maybe it did go fast. I will say, like, the fan base of the show itself is growing. It's been fun to have that, and there's no reason we won't be back next year at all. I like doing the all conference show, but also we'll be back next year. We're going to call the night. Like Ron said, it's 12:30, so my brain is tired. Thanks everyone who joined us in the comment section. Until next year, go Vandals.
Go Eagles.
Bengals, let's go.
You guys all might think like by this far in the year I'd have any idea how to close the show. No, I still have no idea how to do that, guys. So I'm going to find something. Go Vandals.
Go Vandals. Go Vandals.